When I started my public life 12 years ago, I understood the media might be interested in what I did.
The British royal family has survived scandals, betrayals, divorces, and secrets buried beneath palace walls for generations. But nothing quite like this. Because behind the polished smiles, behind the royal ceremonies and carefully staged family photos, a devastating truth has quietly resurfaced. A promise made to Princess Diana in the final days of her life. A promise her sons swore to keep. And a promise that today lies shattered in the silence. Between Prince William and Prince Harry. Before tragedy struck in Paris in 1997, Diana did something few people knew about, something deeply personal, something that stayed hidden for decades. She sat her boys down, not as a princess, not as the most famous woman on earth, but as a mother who feared she might not always be there to protect them. Diana looked at William and Harry, just teenagers then, still innocent, still unaware of the storm their lives would become, and she asked them for one simple promise, a promise that would haunt the royal family nearly 30 years later. Promise me you will always be each other's best friends. Simple words. But behind them was a fear that Diana understood better than anyone inside the monarchy. She knew the system. She knew the hierarchy. She knew what the royal machine does to brothers. One becomes the heir, the other becomes the spare. And history had already proven what that dynamic could do to families. Diana feared it would destroy her sons. At the time, William was just 15. Harry was 12. They were still boys clinging to their mother's warmth, not yet hardened by the brutal spotlight of royal life. They promised her, and for years they kept that promise. After Diana's death, the world watched the two boys walk behind her coffin, a moment so heartbreaking it became etched into global memory forever. Two grieving brothers, side by side, united against the unimaginable. And for decades after, it looked like Diana's wish had survived. They laughed together, worked together, protected each other. Royal photographers who followed them for years said the bond was unmistakable. They weren't just brothers, they were inseparable. But the palace has a way of changing people, slowly at first, and then all at once. Because while the public saw two princes standing together, pressure was building behind palace doors. William was becoming the future king. Harry was becoming something else, the spare. And then the story took the turn that would change everything. In 2024, the royal family was hit with another shock that forced old wounds back into the open. King Charles III was diagnosed with cancer. The palace revealed the news carefully, but the impact was immediate. Behind the official statements and royal updates, something far more emotional was unfolding inside the family. A diagnosis like that changes everything. Suddenly, time feels shorter, regrets feel heavier, and unresolved family conflicts become impossible to ignore. Charles continued carrying out royal duties while undergoing treatment, determined not to show weakness in public. But privately, the reality was unavoidable. The monarchy was entering another fragile chapter. Then came December 12, 2025. In a rare personal message recorded for Channel 4's Stand Up to Cancer campaign, Charles revealed that his treatment had reached a turning point. Doctors had responded positively. The worst phase appeared to be behind him. The nation breathed a sigh of relief. Prime Minister Keir Starmer spoke for millions when he expressed gratitude that the king's treatment was being reduced. But inside the royal family, something far more complicated was unfolding. Because Charles's illness had forced him to confront something he had avoided for years: the growing silence between his sons. William and Harry had barely spoken. Years of interviews, memoir revelations, accusations, and media storms had carved a canyon between them. A canyon Diana once feared would appear. And Charles knew something the public did not. He remembered Diana's words. For nearly 30 years, he had carried them quietly in his memory. Her fear that one day the crown would divide their sons. Her worry that the institution itself might tear them apart. After his diagnosis, Charles reportedly decided the time had come to reveal that memory to both of them. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a royal command. It was a reminder. A reminder of a dying mother's wish. Sources close to the royal family say Charles first spoke about it privately with Harry during a rare meeting at Clarence House in September 2025. The meeting itself was already emotional. The first time father and son had spoken face-to-face in nearly 2 years. But then Charles said something that changed the atmosphere entirely. He told Harry about Diana's fear, about the promise, about the conversation she had with him while they were co-parenting after their bitter divorce in 1996. Diana knew the monarchy too well. She knew the system favored one brother and quietly isolated the other. She feared that dynamic would poison their relationship, so she asked them to promise they would never let it happen. When Harry heard those words again, decades later, something broke. The past rushed back. The funeral, the childhood memories, memories, the bond they once had, and the realization that the promise had not survived. Charles reportedly shared the same memory with William separately. The reaction from both men was described by insiders as deeply emotional. There were tears, long silences, and a painful recognition that Diana had predicted the very fracture now dividing them. But understanding the promise is only part of the story. Because to understand why it shattered, you have to look at the slow chain of events that turned the closest brothers in the royal family into distant strangers. For more than 20 years after Diana's death, everything appeared exactly as she had hoped. William and Harry stood together through everything: their parents' scandalous divorce, their mother's death, the overwhelming media attention that followed them into adulthood. They supported each other through military service, royal duties, and public scrutiny. In 2017, they even stood together to unveil a statue of their mother at Kensington Palace, a moment that seemed to prove Diana's wish had survived the test of time. But history rarely moves in straight lines, and sometimes the smallest turning point can trigger the biggest collapse. That turning point arrived when Harry met Meghan Markle. What followed became one of the most explosive chapters in modern royal history: a royal wedding watched by the world, a shocking decision to leave royal duties, a move to America, a televised interview that sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace. Then came the memoir. Revelations, accusations, private conversations suddenly made public. Each moment pushed the brothers further apart. Royal historians like Robert Lacey described the situation bluntly, saying the original rift had never healed. Others went even further. Biographer Robert Jobson claimed William was deeply angered by personal comments about his wife Catherine, Princess of Wales, inside Harry's book. The damage wasn't temporary, it became structural. By 2023, their public appearances together were painfully distant. At Charles's coronation, they barely spoke. At family events, they stood apart. In August 2024, they attended the funeral of their uncle, Lord Robert Fellows. They were in the same room, but they did not sit together. They did not speak. They did not interact. Two brothers separated by silence. And the most heartbreaking part? Their children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, Prince Louis, Archie, and Lilibet, are growing up as strangers. The divide has already reached the next generation. Exactly the future Diana feared, which is why the resurfacing of her final wish now feels less like nostalgia and more like a warning. Because in 2026, with King Charles recovering from cancer and the 30th anniversary of Diana's death approaching in 2027, the royal family faces a question nobody inside the palace seems able to answer. Can the promise Diana asked for be saved? Or did the monarchy destroy it forever? The truth is, Diana never believed love alone would keep her sons united. She knew the palace. She knew the hierarchy. She knew the invisible pressure that comes with crowns and titles, the silent system that quietly places one brother above the other and pretends the difference doesn't exist. But Diana understood something the institution refused to admit. The moment one child becomes the heir, the other becomes the spare. And history inside the monarchy had already shown what that imbalance could do. So when she asked Prince William and Prince Harry to promise they would always be each other's best friends, she wasn't just being sentimental. She was trying to protect them from the system, from the crown, from the very machine they were born into. And for a long time, it actually worked. The brothers didn't just appear united in public. People inside royal circles say their bond was genuine. They lived together, traveled together, served in the military during the same period. And during some of the darkest moments of their lives, they leaned on each other. One of the most powerful examples came in 2017. 20 years after Diana's death, the two brothers stood shoulder to shoulder at Kensington Palace to unveil a statue of their mother. The moment carried enormous emotional weight. For many watching around the world, it felt like Diana's promise had survived the impossible. Two sons honoring the woman who shaped them, still united, still brothers. But even as cameras captured that moment of unity, something deeper had already begun shifting beneath the surface. Because grief can bond people together, but adulthood can pull them apart. And inside the royal family, the difference between heir and spare becomes sharper with time. William's path was clear. He was the future king. His life, his decisions, his public image, everything was carefully aligned with the crown he would eventually inherit. Harry's path was much less defined. He had freedom William didn't. But he also carried a role that often felt secondary, the spare. And then the royal family faced a moment that would fracture everything. Harry fell in love with Meghan Markle. At first, the story felt like a modern fairy tale. A Hollywood actress marrying a British prince. A new chapter for the monarchy. A symbol of progress. But behind palace walls, tensions were quietly building. Different lifestyles, different expectations, different visions of what royal life should be. Within just 2 years of their wedding, Harry and Meghan made a decision that shocked the entire institution. They stepped away from royal duties. Then came the move to California. Then came the interview with Oprah Winfrey. Suddenly, private family conflicts were no longer private. Allegations, emotional accusations, claims of betrayal. The royal family rarely responds publicly to these kinds of situations, but the damage was immediate. Inside the palace, trust collapsed, and between the two brothers, the silence grew heavier. By the time Harry released his memoir, the rift had become something deeper than a simple disagreement. It had become personal. Royal biographer Robert Lacey explained that the conflict was fueled by statements that cut far deeper than ordinary family arguments. Words once spoken cannot be taken back. And according to royal author Robert Jobson, the situation worsened when personal details involving William's wife, Catherine, Princess of Wales, appeared in Harry's book. For William, that crossed a line. Family disagreements were one thing, but public criticism of his wife was another. From that moment forward, reconciliation became even more complicated. By 2024, the distance between the brothers was visible to everyone. At major royal events, they barely acknowledged each other. At King Charles's coronation in May 2023, their interaction lasted only seconds. At Lord Robert Fellowes' funeral in August 2024, they were present in the same church, yet sat apart, avoided conversation, and left separately. Two men once inseparable, now moving through the same room like strangers. And while the media focused on the visible tension between them, something even more heartbreaking was happening quietly behind the scenes. Their children were growing up without knowing each other. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, Prince Louis, Archie, Lilibet, 5 cousins connected by blood but separated by oceans, distance, and silence. The next generation of Diana's family was already living the future she once feared. And that is why the resurfacing of Diana's promise suddenly carried so much weight. Because now the brothers were not just responsible for their own relationship, they were shaping the relationships of their children too. But, as if the situation wasn't complicated enough already, another new controversy emerged in early 2026. And now, nearly 30 years later, the world is watching to see whether those sons can find their way back to each other, or whether the promise made to their mother will remain one of the saddest, unfinished stories in royal history.